I'm going to start the meeting. My name's Bud Anderson. I'll be your host tonight. We have a very special featured speaker, Trisha Pritikin. And I've read her book. Perhaps many of you will want to read her book after this meeting. It's just an amazing piece of work, and we'll hear more about that a little bit later. To start our meeting, I want to introduce our founder, Tracy Powell, who will give a land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We want to state that we at No More Bombs are fortunate to live in the place that we do here in Skagit Valley and Fidalgo Island. And we look like we're all on video screens here, but actually we have a home here, and we want to acknowledge the folks who have taken care of this home for centuries and allowed us to be a part of it. And that's the ancestral tribal nations whose land we occupy now, the Swinomish, the Samish, and the Upper Skagit native sovereign nations have been very generous in taking care of the waters and the lands here, and we appreciate them doing that. And we want to make sure that we acknowledge and respect what they have done for us, and we will try our best to respond in kindness and grace as they have for us. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words, Tracy. Our meeting is technically coordinated by Zane Butler, and he is also recording our meeting, and it'll be available on YouTube for those that want to review it, or if you missed it tonight, you can go back. So thank you very much, Zane. Also posted on our website, for those of you interested in more information, if you go to nomorebombs.org, you can pick up our website. We have 4 main subcategories on there. The first one is information, which includes our monthly newsletters and also updates on current legislation, both statewide and nationally. It has a second feature on our steering committee, which I'll introduce later. Third feature is images, which show images of what happens when nuclear weapons are used. And then the general miscellaneous category of more has various movies, treaties, worldwide treaties that are being negotiated. And also it features Tracy Powell's dove projects, where he is a sculptor. He's carving sculptures of doves, selling them, proceeds going to this effort. So please look at our website for more information. About our group, No More Bombs, we're a local group based in Skagit Valley. Our mission statement, we're a nonviolent advocacy group that promotes the concept of total nuclear disarmament, including the decommissioning, dismantlement, and abolition of all nuclear weapons. We pledge to initiate, support, and endorse legislative action to that end, and to inform our fellow citizens about these issues and to encourage their participation in the nuclear disarmament movement. We actively cooperate with other organizations working towards nuclear disarmament, such as the overall state umbrella organization, the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. The No More Bombs leadership team, our founder, as I mentioned, is Tracy Powell. Wave, Trace. Is our spiritual leader for sure. Kathleen Flanagan, Julia Hurd, Wim Hoopermans, and your program coordinator tonight and host, Bud Anderson. Couple more announcements. Pardon? Yeah.
Holly Graham.
We will introduce Holly a little bit later. Another special guest. Talented lady for sure. We meet quarterly on Zoom. This is our second quarter meeting. Our first one was Betsy Bell from Olympia. talked about her travels to Russia and the book she wrote about that. Our third quarter meeting will probably be centered around August 6th and August 9th. And as we remember, that's the 76th anniversary of dropping nuclear weapons on Japan. And then our fourth quarterly meeting will be hosted by Tracy. That'll give a talk on Back from the Brink, the Federal Nuclear Modernization Program, and why we should step back from that. So a couple of good quarterly programs coming up. We're meeting by Zoom until, of course, we can rejoin our in-person meetings. So Julia Hurd has a very special announcement and a fun little surprise.
Yeah. So we're delighted to share Holly Graham's song this evening, Downwind. Holly is a singer-songwriter and educator, and she wrote this song with Tracy Spring in the early 1980s as part of the soundtrack to the film Hanford and Human Health. It's a documentary that aired on PBS stations after a conference of the same name in Spokane, sponsored by Physicians for Social Responsibility. And Holly's here this evening. Thank you, Holly. And let's hear her song.
Sorry, I didn't have it queued up. Now I do.
Rolling desert, sagebrush covered land, Gable Mountain. Against white cliffs it stands, sacred Indian vision, site of old. Fine place for a nuclear dump site, now we're told. River basin, roll Columbia, roll, are you poison? Has the sickness reached your soul? Carrying danger, roll into the sea. Radioactivity, we're milling more plutonium there than green. Farming in the radioactive rain. Downwind, downwind. Golden mesa, sky of deepest blue, one black cloud seems to hover over you. Once called White Bluff, Hanford's now your name, and making nuclear triggers is your game. Sons and daughters drawing paychecks from the war, not at witty, what they're really working for. Does the industry protect its own at least? No safety in the belly of the beast. And we're milling more plutonium there than green. Farming in the radioactive rain. Downwind, live farms and vineyards too. Findings grown to 90 in the root. Babies dying in the fallout from the stack. But the DOE's not telling us the facts. You may think it's very quiet, you may think it's very deep. Although we may deny it, death lies sleeping at our feet. Oh, maybe you'll forgive us for the sins we still repeat, until we say enough and shut it down. Downwind, let the air blow fresh and clear. Downwind, no more poison in the soul. Downwind, let the sparkling water flow. Downwind.
Thank you so much for that song, Holly. And Downwind certainly is going to play a big part in our talk tonight. With that, Julia will introduce our featured speaker.
Yeah, so No More Bombs. We are thrilled and honored to host award-winning author, activist, and lawyer Trisha Pritikin tonight. Trisha has worked for decades for justice for those who, like herself and her family, have suffered from serious illnesses, as well as cancer, birth defects, and even death following exposure to radiation. Trisha was born and raised in Richland, Washington, downwind of the 600 square mile top secret Hanford Reservation, where the plutonium used for the world's first atomic bomb test and the bomb dropped on Nagasaki was produced. Hanford continued to produce plutonium for over 40 years during the Cold War, all the while releasing radiation into the air, the waters of the Columbia River, the soil, all without oversight. Trisha will talk about her book and experiences as a Hanford downwinder. We welcome her heartily and thank her for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Julia, for the nice introduction. And that song was beautiful. What talent, you know? It was a really pretty song. Thank you for writing it. I'm going to have to, I haven't seen the film, but I want to. So thank you very much. You're a really talented person. Most presentations on Hanford that you will see pertain to leaking tanks or the environmental legacy of Hanford. There's only one book that's been published, that is this one, about the actual stories of those of us who grew up as children in the downwind and downriver areas. So this book is very helpful. It has been already over the last year to people who are trying to show others that nuclear weapons production and testing causes certain problems. These are verified, diagnosed medical problems. So it's really good and helpful for solid evidence. What I'm going to do tonight, this is my first official screen share. We just practiced it, so I hope I'll do it right. Please let me know if you can't see the screen, but I've prepared a slideshow that's purely about the people. That's what I want to talk about tonight, because you hear enough about Hanford, what it did, why it did what it did. So here I go. Let me see if I can share the screen. Okay, PowerPoint here is, whoops, hold on a sec. I forgot to do the one thing you're supposed to do, which is hit this share screen button. Then I go over here. Then I go over here. Let's see. Now, is it working? Yes, you're good? Okay, thank you. All right, so I want to just start with a very short amount of information on Hanford, because I think your group of any groups is going to know more about Hanford than most people do. Still, I like to just say a little bit about it. Hanford, as Julia mentioned, produced the plutonium for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki and for the Trinity test, which was the very first test of an atomic bomb in the world in July 1945. And then Nagasaki was August 9th, 1945. But many people don't know that Hanford's plutonium also was used in thermonuclear and atomic tests, both at the Nevada test site and in the Pacific Proving Grounds, which includes the Marshall Islands. Are you guys hearing me okay? Just shake your heads if you are. Yes? Okay, good. So I want to go to the first slide here. If you can see what this is all 9 reactors. During the Cold War, Hanford had 9 production reactors, and there were about 4 to 5 separations facilities. Most of the stuff that went in the air came out of the separations facilities. A lot of people think it came out of the reactors, but actually only some came out of the reactors, and then a lot came out of the separations facilities. They also dumped radiation straight into the river. So you can see all these plants are spaced about, I think it's supposed to be about a mile apart. In case there's an explosion in one, it's not going to cause all of them to go. But if there is an explosion in one, you're going to hurt a whole lot of people downwind, you know, and downriver. So from startup in November of 1944, and for 40 years thereafter, Hanford's radioactive byproducts were released to the air throughout a huge area in the Pacific Northwest that includes eastern Washington, Idaho, western Montana, northern Oregon, and into British Columbia. The stuff also was dumped into the river and went down to the mouth of the Columbia. So it's a very broad, radioactive area. Nobody learned about any of this until 1986. So that means people have been exposed for 40 years before Freedom of Information Act requests and public pressure caused the Department of Energy to finally declassify early Hanford operating agreement records to let us know about the radiation. Okay. This is Karen Dorn Steele. She wrote the introduction for the book. She's one of my heroes. She was a very courageous reporter with the Spokesman Review who, she got harassed by the Department of Energy for her stories. She began to report on Hanford in around 1983 when a downwinder named Tom Bailey asked her to come out and talk to his neighbors. There were many cases of cancer and heart attacks in young men who are working the fields, and he wanted to meet some of these people out there. And it was his sort of initial contact that started her working on these stories. And she's always been my hero because she's so brave. And if it hadn't been for her, I wonder if these stories had ever been made public. So she wrote the introduction, which was really wonderful. In 2015, the litigation, which is called In re Hanford Nuclear Reservation Litigations, Mass Toxic Tort Personal Injury Litigation, which involved about 3,000 plaintiffs. This litigation was finally concluding with settlements. There were several bellwether hearings in 2005, but most of the people settled if they got any settlement at all. These were small settlements. And as the last settlements were being sent out, it occurred to me that if our stories were not published and put out for the public, our stories would disappear. People would never know about the Pacific Northwest Downwinders, which is what I like to call them because they're all throughout the Pacific Northwest. So I asked these two attorneys. By the way, the word attorneys is misspelled here, but they fixed it in the final. But in the book, you'll see it's now spelled correctly. I was very upset at them. So we really didn't spell it like that. Anyway, these are two attorneys for the plaintiffs. Tom Folds is from the Hanford Litigation Office, which is now closed in Seattle. And this is Dick Iman from, what do they call it now? They keep changing the name. Iman, Allison, I'm not quite sure what the name of it is anymore. It's a Spokane firm. They're both plaintiffs' counsel. And I told them what my project was. I wanted to collect the stories. I had no way of locating former Downwinder plaintiffs because the lists are protected. These are privacy issues. So I had to send out a letter through the two firms to clients, and then anybody who wanted to participate contacted me. And so we ended up with about 25 people. Okay. And so that's when I started the project, was in 2015. Let me see here. Without the help of these two firms, I wouldn't have been able to find this many people to do this project. I used the settlement monies that I received, which wasn't much. I did receive a settlement because I had a high exposure dose. So I've had a lot of health problems, but I used the settlement to fund my travels and all my expenses for this book. Actually, my settlement plus more because it was a very small settlement. This is a map that was brought to Karen Dorn Steele's attention. If you look at it, it's a little hard to see, but it's an emergency plan zone map given to people who lived within 10 miles of the only operating power reactor at Hanford. I think it's called the Columbia Generating Station. This map was given to the neighbors, and then it's the Andrew Jeskis, who were farmers in Eltopia, used this map and there's X's and O's on the map, and those show cases of cancer are the X's, and the O's are cases of young men who have suffered heart attacks while working the fields. And so this was the first anecdotal evidence of problems downwind of Hanford, and it got picked up by a lot of local and national media as evidence, anecdotal evidence of problems downwind of Hanford. Okay. This is a map that's in the book. This is a GIS map I had made. And as you can see Hanford is there kind of as a symbol. And it was a little hard to see it on this map, but we darkened in all the areas where the radiation went. It basically went over to the Cascades and kind of got blocked there, went up to the mountains, but it went all through the Columbia Basin and to the east. And this is where all the people lived whose stories are included in the book. And they lived in northern Oregon, along the Columbia River, eastern Washington. There's one from Idaho, the people that I interviewed. So that map hopefully is pretty clear in the book. Now what I'm going to do is go through some stories. And I'll do as many as I can till I run out of time. And Julia's told me I have 40 minutes. I want to make sure, including what I've already said. So I have a little thing here. I hope, let me know when I have 5 minutes left, if you would. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, this is Charlotte Ray McCormick. I think from listening to these stories, you'll see repeated diseases and see what's happened to people. Charlotte was born in 1938 in Emmett, Idaho. And when she was young, her family moved to the town of Boardman, Oregon, which is on the Columbia River. This is the old town of Boardman. There's another town there now that's been moved away from the river. This was right on the river. The family used the water for drinking. They had a boat, so they went water skiing. They used it for irrigation. So lots of water consumption, and that river was full of the radionuclides that were dumped in from the reactors. They were also getting airborne radiation at that time. And her exposures were during the highest years of releases because she arrived there when right before the facility started up. So she got some of the highest exposures. When she was 50 years old, she began to suffer from swollen lymph nodes, fevers, itching, fatigue, coughing, and headaches. And she consulted with several doctors to find out what was wrong and was diagnosed with two things. One is autoimmune thyroiditis, which is also what I have and what many, many Downwinders have. It's also known as Hashimoto's. Your immune system is starting to destroy your own thyroid. And she was diagnosed with large histocytic malignant lymphoma, which is a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she went through radiation and chemo for the lymphoma, and that helped her somewhat. 5 years later, though, she began to feel really tired again. She started bruising easily. She had night sweats, and she was very, very tired with headaches. She went back to the doctor. This time, blood tests showed her white blood cell count was off, and it was acute myeloid leukemia, which is a cancer of the blood cells. And both lymphoma and leukemia result from problems with white blood cells. So this is a river exposure. There were river exposure plaintiffs in the litigation. Not a lot, but some did get some settlements. There was a study done during the litigation by I'm not sure if he was an endocrinologist or an epidemiologist, that showed many cancers in people who had lived on the river. So that's yet to be determined. It wasn't really focused on in the litigation, but it is a big issue. So Charlotte was hospitalized for chemo and other treatments, and she received platelet transfusions from her brothers, and she seemed to respond well and was discharged. But 4 months later, she developed infections and cold sores. And a broad-spectrum antibiotic was prescribed, and she improved. But then a few days later, she got worse. She got tired, exhausted, was again hospitalized. And her doctor decided to try an experimental aggressive leukemia medication, but it didn't work, and she died after lapsing into a coma at age 55. And many members of Charlotte's family who lived downriver near Boardman have suffered from cancers or died young. Both maternal grandparents who had lived in Boardman since Hanford operations began died of cancer. Charlotte's sister died of lupus, an autoimmune disease associated with radiation exposure. Her brother died of stomach cancer, and all 4 kids have serious health problems. So here, this is a river exposure I'm starting with here. The rest of them are airborne exposures. Whoops. Let's see if I can actually do this. All right. This is Marlene Campbell. Marlene was raised in Ephrata, about 90 miles north of Hanford. There's all people around Hanford. She was born in 1938 and stayed there in Ephrata from then on. In 45 to 46, when Marlene was in the first grade, she started feeling really sick and she never actually felt well again. And she cried morning and night because of severe leg and joint pains. And in school, when they tried to learn to write with a pencil, her fingers hurt and they were bent and crooked and swollen. Her teachers told her that was because she was holding her pencil incorrectly. Marlene's eyes started to hurt until she was unable to see the blackboard, and these problems went on for years, and no one took her seriously. And when she turned 11, she developed red, warm, itchy rashes across most of her body, which she continued to have all the way through elementary school and high school. This is amazing. She has all these problems and nobody's taking her seriously. And she went to the doctor, nobody knew what was wrong. After high school, she went to the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. She had a really hard time, but kept pushing herself. She had sore muscles and joints, extreme fatigue, chronic sore throat, and flu-like symptoms with fever. These were all symptoms of arthritis, but she was told she was too young to have arthritis, which is a quote, old person's disease, unquote. I'm going to show you this picture. It's quite amazing. This is Marlene's hands. It's, just amazing. Finally, when Marlene was in her 30s, because of her swollen and deformed hands, a rheumatologist in Portland diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. And because of the condition of her body, they told her she must have had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disorder. You see a lot of autoimmune disorders in the Downwinders. Often you see people with several autoimmune diseases. I'm an example. I have autoimmune thyroiditis. My fingers have just started to deform suddenly, just boom, over, during the pandemic, they went from straight to deformed. And so, I think this is the second autoimmune disease. It's just quite amazing. Okay, this is Jay Mullen. Okay, Jay is the little guy there. That's his big sister. Jay was born in 1940, and from 45 to 46, they lived at the Farragut Naval Station, southeast of Sandpoint on Lake, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Pend Oreille. Is that right? Lake Pend Oreille? Did I say that right? Okay. Which is in Idaho, where his father was stationed as a medical corpsman during the war. And during that period of time, 44 through 45, Hanford was releasing some of its highest levels of airborne radiation, including I-131. So there's something called a latency period, which happens after people are exposed to low-dose ionizing radiation, like what was released from Hanford. And so a lot of us, almost all of us, felt pretty well for a while, and then we started getting sick. So Jay's thyroid began to just go haywire on him when he was a sophomore at the University of Oregon. He was nearly 19 years old when he started feeling really sick. His hands were shaking and he began to sweat profusely. And a doctor suggested something was wrong with his thyroid, which is that's pretty enlightened for this doctor. He was hospitalized for several days for observation and then discharged. The next day he woke up paralyzed from the waist down, which I thought was amazing. I looked it up and there actually is this problem relating to the thyroid where your body just goes into complete paralysis. So he was sent down to University of California, San Francisco Medical Center for a consultation where a lot of tests were done. And the paralysis by then was intermittent. And the doctors concluded that the thyroid was the cause of the paralysis and the thyroid had to be removed. So he had a total thyroidectomy and it cured the paralysis, but the costs of hospitalizations and care ran Jay's family into the ground. Unfortunately, Jay passed away while I was writing this book, right after I interviewed him. And you never know if it had anything, to do with Hanford, but he was an amazing guy and I really miss him. He was a great advocate. Next is, this is the cutest picture, really, I swear, this is the cutest picture of a dad and baby. This is Sally and her dad. And Sally Stearns was born in Denver in 1942 at the Salvation Army Hospital for Unwed Mothers. And she was adopted shortly thereafter and raised as an only child. Just a little while after that, Sally's family moved to Richland, where Sally's dad worked for DuPont at the Hanford facility. DuPont was the first contractor at Hanford. When Sally was a child, she would wake up in the middle of the night with blood all over her nightgown from a major nosebleed. This happened frequently, and she'd need to go to the hospital to have her nostrils packed to stop the bleeding. Nosebleeds are a recognized symptom of radiation exposure. They occur downwind of Chernobyl, and they've been seen also in Fukushima. Sally remembers the duck and cover drills in school that started around 1951 because the Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949, demonstrating it now had nuclear capability, and everyone began to worry about the possibility of a nuclear attack by the Reds. During the drills, loud sirens sounded and everybody would dive under their desks with their hands behind their heads. Nowadays, people say, well, how did that help to protect anyone? And there is no answer for that. She has uterine tumors and fibroids, digestive issues, disintegrated joints, fibromyalgia. And the thing that's really, a comment she made to me when I interviewed her was really interesting. I don't know if you guys have been to Richland, but there used to be a museum called Crest. Are you familiar with that museum? The Columbia River Exhibition of History, Science, and Technology. It's now been replaced by Reach Museum, which is, I think they're trying to turn the place supposedly into a wildlife refuge, but so they don't really have the artifacts they used to have in the museum. But she noticed there was a picture of her dad and his co-workers on the wall. And she noticed there was no mention of the children of those workers who, like her, grew up in Richland and are now sick or dead from radiation exposure. So she asked, why is only part of the story being told? And that's a story I've asked many times. In fact, when you go to the B reactor museum, you don't hear a thing about downwinders or anybody being sick. Okay. This is next one is Rants Jones. Interesting guy here. He was born in Richland in 1945, same place I was born, Atomic Energy Commission's Cadillac Hospital in Richland. He grew up in a B house. We lived in alphabet houses. I was in an F house, he was in a B house, there were A houses, H houses. Anyway, he grew up in a B house in Richland, and as a child, he was treated for allergies, asthma, and hypothyroidism. He stayed on and worked at Hanford as an adult in several capacities, including managing railroad operations for the Department of Energy, which oversaw highly radioactive shipments of radioactive excess equipment burials. They had their own train there. You probably heard about the place where the trains were, there's a kind of a tunnel, and there was a train in the tunnel just full of radioactive stuff, and the tunnel collapsed about 2 years ago. It was in the news. Yeah. So he has been diagnosed with 9 cancers since the year 2000. He's a Mormon, and he has this special nutrient mixture that he swears has kept him alive, and he has a great attitude. The cancers he's had are bone cancer, thyroid cancer, prostate, colon, parathyroid, testicular cancer. And he's convinced that these cancers are the result of exposures both on the job and as a child growing up in Richland. He is by far the sickest of all of us and the best attitude of anybody I've ever met. Okay, this is on the left, the little girl on the left is Susan. This is Susan Ward and her siblings sitting on a heap of dirt at her dad's archaeological dig. Susan Ward's family lived downwind of Hanford during her childhood, and the family had no connection to Hanford. A lot of downwinders had zero connection to Hanford. They just happened to live downwind. She was born in California in 1946, and then her family moved that same year to Walla Walla, where her dad began work as an archaeologist for the National Park Service, excavating the ruins of the Whitman Mission and Fort Walla Walla. He freelanced for the Smithsonian Institution, excavating burial grounds and cremation pits on Sheep Island and Canoe Island in the Columbia River. These islands were important burial islands and are within the ceded lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. He also excavated at the site of a Native American village at Wallula on the Columbia River. The site was going to be flooded following construction of the McNary Dam, which began in 1947. He was trying to preserve the artifacts. The family lived in Walla Walla, and Susan and her siblings, as you can see here, spent time with their dad during the summer camping near the digs. And they dug around the dirt and helped dig up historic artifacts. Susan has a memory of herself when she was little, sometime in the winter, outside the family's house in Walla Walla. She was wearing her little yellow Mickey Mouse shirt. She remembers getting a bad sunburn on her face, even though it was winter. This would have been around the time of the Hanford Green Run in the winter of 1949, which resulted in a hot spot of radiation in the Walla Walla area. I mentioned in the book, I talk all about the Green Run and the purpose of the Green Run and how much stuff was released and the hot spots that were created due to the topography. And while camping with their father, the children ate Columbia River fish, including sturgeon, which are bottom dwellers. And Susan often has wondered whether the sturgeon ingested radioactive sludge and debris off the bottom of the river. The kids also drank water from the river and went swimming a lot. As a child, Susan always had cold hands and feet. She was depressed, had bad teeth and gums and fingernails, and was always tired. And she was always at the doctor and taking medicine. And when she was a young adult, she developed a growth on her neck, which was a thyroid goiter. She's given thyroid meds to shrink the goiter. And after the goiter shrank, she went off the meds and became spacey, nervous, and unable to concentrate. After some time off the meds, the goiter returned, which made her depression worsen, and because she was worried about what in the heck was happening with her health. Like a lot of us did, because none of us knew about Hanford's releases till 1986. And by then, a lot of us had been sick for years. In 1990, an endocrinologist did a series of diagnostic procedures to try to figure out what was wrong. He found out that Susan's thyroid was misshapen, and he referred her to nuclear medicine for a thyroid scan. And that came up positive for thyroid cancer, so she had part of her thyroid taken out. She now has to be on synthetic thyroid meds, and she's worried she's going to develop thyroid cancer. And later she developed like a skin cancer, basal cell carcinoma that required removal of parts of her face. It was very disfiguring. And she was a nurse, and she ended up working only at night with bandages on her face because she couldn't go out in the daytime. And she's worried that she may have passed something on to her children due to her Hanford radiation exposure. So far, you can see there's a sort of a range of health problems, but most of us have thyroid under it all, sort of thyroid in there and autoimmune stuff. This is June Casey. Some of you may have heard of her. Interesting story. She is actually 19 when she went to Whitman College in Walla Walla. She's one of the older exposure cases. She went in September to Whitman College in Walla Walla to study music, and the Green Run was in December of 1949. When she went there, she was healthy and everything was fine. Right after the Green Run, she started feeling really sick and tired, and her hair started falling out. When she went home for a Christmas vacation, her mom took her to a doctor, and they determined that she had a really high TSH, which indicates hypothyroidism. And so her hair never grew back. She wears a wig. She's developed, so she has hypothyroidism from that really high exposure just during the Green Run, which was 2 days. But because she was in Walla Walla, there was a hot spot there, which means it rained out and all the radiation went down to the ground. And after marriage, she suffered both a miscarriage and a stillbirth. A lot of women exposed downwind of Hanford have had reproductive problems. Okay, so then this is Michael Helland. Let's see, how am I for time? How much time do I have remaining here? Julia, do you have a watch there or a clock? I dropped mine on the floor. I have to find it. Let's see what time it is. All right, just a minute. I'll figure it out. Okay. All right, we're good. I think I have 10 minutes. Is that correct? Does that sound about right? Oh, yeah.
That sounds good.
Okay. This is Michael Helland. When he was 20 years old, he was home from college, and his mother noticed there was a swelling on his neck. He was born, by the way, he's born in 1946, And when he was 19, he was home. His mom noticed something in his neck. It was a goiter. And so they went to the doctor, and the doctor wasn't happy about the goiter in a kid that age. And he said this shouldn't be happening in someone your age. And he diagnosed papillary thyroid cancer. Then he was sent to Spokane's only endocrinologist. And the endocrinologist asked if he'd been exposed to anything toxic in childhood. And that was interesting because the doctor didn't know about radiation releases at that time. That was 1966, and nobody knew about the Hanford's radiation releases until 1986. And the endocrinologist said they were seeing a lot of thyroid cancer in young people in the area. Well, this is really amazing. That what's happened with a lot of these people who are diagnosed, back, in the 80s and before, is that the treatment for thyroid cancer was really harsh. So, and the treatment resulted in more medical problems. A lot of people who are downwinders had this problem. So the I-131 scan revealed that all 25 to 30 lymph glands in Michael's neck had been invaded by thyroid cancer. The doctors tried to kill the thyroid cancer 3 ways: through radical neck surgery to remove the cancerous nodules and thyroid, through massive cobalt irradiation of his neck, and finally with I-131 ablation treatment. The radical neck surgery involved opening his neck up like a sardine can, peeling back the skin and taking everything out. The surgery destroyed his parathyroid glands as well. They're right next to the thyroid and they control serum calcium levels. I also have that problem. My thyroid was taken out for thyroid cancer and I lost the parathyroids, except for one. It's a terrible disease to live with. It causes paralysis, kidney damage, all kinds of stuff. And for him also, hypoparathyroidism continues to be a very challenging issue. And just after his surgery, he started choking and they nearly had to perform a tracheotomy, emergency tracheotomy, which would be cutting a hole in the front of his neck to allow him to breathe, but he was somehow able to breathe again and narrowly avoided the tracheotomy. Nowadays, he has many problems with swallowing and choking due to the scar tissue that impinges on his esophagus due to the radical neck surgery. And then after the neck surgery, he went through several weeks of cobalt irradiation, which caused hair loss and skin blanching. And they wouldn't give people that much irradiation today. That was how much they used to give people for treatment for this type of cancer. And then within a few months of the radiation treatment, Michael started having symptoms of ankylosing spondylitis, which causes the vertebrae in the spine to fuse. So now if he's worried that he's ever in an emergency, nobody can tilt his neck back or it'll break his neck. See, he's got all these really difficult issues because of he was diagnosed so early with the thyroid cancer back when the treatment was so extreme. This is a second case, very much like Michael's. This is Dan. Interestingly, Dan's a healthcare professional in the Tri-Cities. And so he didn't want his last name used because he lives right in the middle of everybody over there. And, he wanted his story included, but he didn't want anybody to know who he was. So he was born in May 1950. He lived downwind of Hanford all throughout his childhood. After graduating from high school in '68, he went to school at WSU in Pullman, but he spent about 23 years downwind of Hanford. And by the time he was 38, he knew something was wrong. He was tired all the time. He gained weight, even though he ate carefully. He had no energy. He had dry skin, hair loss on his legs and scalp, and areas of his skin had lost pigmentation, which is typical of hypothyroidism. In the year 2000, Dan's internist found nodules on his thyroid, which are cancerous. The nodules, which are like little bumps on your thyroid, were causing Dan trouble with swallowing and choking on his food as the nodules were pressing on his trachea. And he was worried that the cancer would destroy his trachea. And at worst, he thought he could at least breathe through a tracheostomy hole in his neck if that became necessary. He wanted to survive very much. He's exactly the same age as I am. This story really kind of hits me every time I read it. He had a total thyroidectomy in July 2000, then went through radioiodine ablation therapy, followed by 5,400 rads of nuclear accelerated X-ray radiation at the Tri-Cities Cancer Center. And then it was that radiation treatment that caused him all kinds of lifelong problems, just like the last story with Michael. He wore a face shield during radiation, but can't grow a beard on the area of his neck that wasn't covered. And when he moves his head or jaw, there's a popping, clicking sound due to hardened, non-flexible tissue caused by the radiation. He has chronic dry mouth, and his teeth are decaying from the radiation, and his digestion is now problematic. Radiation burned his skin, and he has to watch for melanomas developing within the irradiated areas. As a result of the treatments, Dan has dysphagia, which involves a lot of difficulty swallowing. And if he wants to take a pill, he has to have it all chopped up in tiny little pieces. And he has to have water with it every time. So if he doesn't have water, he can choke easily. He's very worried about, dying from, because he keeps blocking his throat all the time. His radiation oncologist asked him whether he'd ever lived in a downwind county, and he learned that this form of thyroid cancer he had could possibly be linked to I-131, one of the radioactive substances released from Hanford. Okay, what I have left here is the story of Jamie and Brenda Weaver. I have the story of Tom Bailey. I got about 4 stories left. Let me see how much time I have here. I don't know, you could choose if you'd like. You want to hear about the story of the woman whose daughter was born without eyes, or the story of the Hollywood actress, very famous, who lived in Pasco and was hit with Hanford downwind problems and just lost a lot of opportunities and stopped being able to act, or the one about the woman, this is the last story in the book, Judy Meyer, who developed a really strange cancer after dancing around in the ruthenium flakes that were flying through the air in the early 50s. Which of those would you like me to tell? Anybody have an opinion?
About the actress.
What?
The actress?
Okay, the actress. Great. I love that story. All right, let's go to the actress. I actually have some good details about
Then
her.
we'll
She's
have time for questions and answers.
we will. Depends on how much you want to hear about this actress. Let's see here. Okay, that's Brendan, her daughter, was born without eyes. Oh, there's Joe Biden and Jamie Weaver. She has no eyes. She has artificial eyes. She was the March of Dimes person for a year. That's Tom Bailey. There she is. The one in the middle is Lois Foraker. You can look her up. There's a lot of stuff on her online. She thought she looked like baby Buddha in this picture. She was born in 46 in Pasco and moved to Western Washington with her family when she was 2. As a child, she returned every summer to Kennewick to stay with her cousin. So basically, she started at UW for a year in their acting program, then went to join the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. While in San Francisco, she was tapped to play featured roles in Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry and The Candidate with Robert Redford. She moved to Los Angeles in '72 and worked on MASH. She played various nurses on the show, twice as Nurse Abel. She also had the role of Nurse Coleman on After MASH, which is a show spinoff. In '82, she appeared in Newhart. In '84, in '86, in Murder, She Wrote. In Gremlins in '84, Exorcist 3, Child's Play, Radio Flyer, and Hill Street Blues, as well as the Dom DeLuise show as Dom's girlfriend. Her favorite TV role is that of a Russian housekeeper on Saint Elsewhere. She speaks a little Russian that she'd learned at UW, so she sounded somewhat authentic. And she was also in the pilot for Northern Exposure and on Night Court, Rachel Gunn RN, Larry Sanders Show, Third Rock from the Sun, The X-Files as Sylvia Jassy. I looked her up and it was really interesting to see her picture. And The West Wing. So you can see she really had an active, successful career until in 1982, she found a lump on her neck, which scared her greatly. And she went in for an exam and was fed radioactive iodine. And it revealed that it was cancerous. They removed half of her thyroid, but the other half was so striated, the doctor thought it was going to develop into thyroid cancer. So they took the whole thyroid out. What happened to her then was really awful. It triggered autoimmune, it disrupted the endocrine system, having her thyroid out, and caused her to develop asthma, which is an autoimmune disease. She was on prednisone for 15 years. And in 1990, she had a very bad episode of asthma and was intubated for a week, inhaling steroids. So she has autoimmune thyroiditis and asthma, a second autoimmune disease. And you are more susceptible to a second one if you have one. And the problem in Hollywood is when you have thyroid disease, you gain weight, hypothyroidism, not hyper, but hypothyroidism. And that's a real problem in Hollywood. She was up for one of the lead roles on LA Law and was taking steroids. And she found that on steroids, she had too much energy for camera. She explained to me, you have to have just a certain amount of energy and be really simple for the camera. She couldn't do that on steroids. So she lost the role due to her health issues. She'd also been on Third Rock from the Sun, and they called for her to come and do her role. But at the time, she was in the hospital, intubated, and couldn't go because they were shooting her up with 500 milligrams of prednisone per day to get control of her asthma. So they rewrote, no way she could do the role. So they rewrote her whole neighborhood relationship with John Lithgow, and she lost the role. So, you know, she lost her theater relationships as well, because you can't go on stage unless you have a lot of breath. These health issues altered her entire life, and she lost many professional opportunities when she started to get sick. So that is the end of my stories. I have more, but I won't sink you under them. But I think you get a feeling for some of the health problems we've been facing. So I should do this unshare right now. Let me see, hold on. Stop share. There we go.
Well, Trisha, I want to thank you for that presentation. A couple of comments. I was following your talk by looking at the table of contents, and you shared about the first half of the stories of the people that you represent. So the book has the stories you just heard plus another half that we didn't have time to get to. So, you know, that's really stunning. So we're going to have a brief question answer period. But I'd like to start off by, is there any hope that these people can get some type of justice from the people that harmed them?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I've been helping, answer it is going to be different than you might expect. I've been helping a group of people who are Nevada test site downwinders who are trying to get compensation for their injuries under a law called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Some of them are eligible for compensation there. Here, downwind at Hanford, the only thing we had, the only option was the litigation. And people got very meager settlements if they got anything. And if you did not have thyroid cancer or thyroid disease or one of the very few river cancers, you got nothing, even though you had a terrible other kind of cancer. So I think there should be a national compensation plan, and I've drafted something. I am an attorney, so I went ahead and drafted something that I think will work. But I'm waiting for the people who are trying to expand RICA to get done with their efforts first. And so when they realize they're not successful, then they'll be ready for a national compensation plan that would include Marshall Islanders and people from all the Manhattan Project sites and Cold War sites, Oak Ridge, Savannah River, Rocky Flats, so many people who have the same diseases that are compensated for workers under the Nuclear Worker Compensation Law. Isn't that interesting? You can use that law as a model and say, if you're recognizing those cancers as radiogenic for workers, then you're going to recognize those cancers as radiogenic for downwinders. So that's what I plan to do once the people get done with their fiddling around with RICA. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Great. So questions from our attendees for Trisha?
Well,
Chuck, you're muted. Chuck, if you can unmute, we can there we go.
Okay, I just wanted to just make a statement more than with that. The question about anybody growing up. I grew up in Richland, Washington, born 1946. My father was the head of the Health Physics Society. He was the head of the radiation control with that. My neighbor, Dr. Cormord, is mentioned in the book, and also my neighbor, Leo Bustad. along with that. I lived on Horn Street in an R house, and my wife and I were part of a study from the would be the
Fred Hutch-
Poison Center, Atlantic, with that, and Congress put that, so we had a lot of studies, and then all of a sudden that was shut down, and never heard from them again. I have thyroid problems and kidney problems. My father-in-law died 8 years ago from radiation with that, because he had tumors on his brain, no lesions whatsoever. My father also started, with the end reactor in the 100 area as well. He died 14 years ago with kidney cancer and thyroid problems. Both of them got awards. My father got a $150,000 award, and my father-in-law got a $250,000 award. No children that I know of and have ever gotten anything.
I know, right?
And I don't think that will get them. We've been
Well-
lied to by AEC. My father even lied to me when I asked him questions in high school about some concerns and things like that. I grew up in Jefferson Elementary School with that, and the city of Richland was divided north and south. The people who lived on the north side were all management and supervisors. The people who lived in the south side were maintenance people with that, and they had two. The elementary schools were divided, junior highs were divided, so that we didn't talk to children or kid friends from the south side, nor vice versa.
Yeah,
Interesting book that you had. Where did you grow up at?
Richland.
Richland?
Yeah.
So I grew up in Richland too. My brother knows you, Robert German.
I don't recognize the name, but it's.
And what year did you graduate from?
I left when I was 10 years old. So I
Okay,
didn't
and what
graduate from high school.
grade school did you go to?
Sacagawea.
You went to Sacagawea. Okay. I went to
You should
Jefferson.
belong to the Sandstorm listserv. You can learn a whole lot by you.
Right.
You prescribe, yeah, I read through all that just to see all
Okay.
what people are thinking. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your input.
Thank you. Thank you for your book. I got it and I've read it.
Oh, thank you. I'm hoping that the national compensation plan modeled after the Nuclear Worker Compensation Act would address some of these issues of children who are also sick.
Right. But it's not, we've tried. My wife has asthma bad, and her brother had kidney cancer and had his 1.5 of his kidneys taken out, and her sister, my sister-in-law, was born without a lung,
Sorry, yeah.
and they've all denied it.
There's a lot
had
of us
nothing to
like
do.
that.
Huh?
There are a lot of us like that.
Right.
Yes.
God bless you and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tricia, if I can slip in one other question. I've been very concerned about the downwinders, principally in the Spokane area, but what about the minority communities, the farm workers? I'm very
Yeah.
concerned that they're underrepresented. Is there any help on the way for them?
Well, that was a great question too. And there was something called the Hanford Health Effects Subcommittee that I served on for, I think, 9 years in the 1990s. We had 2 representatives from the Latino migrant and resident farm worker communities, because there were people who actually just stayed all the time living in the area, and there were the people who were brought in to work. They asked for a scoping survey, which was done and funded by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And it described all these people that no one had ever thought of. Japanese interned people who were in the downwind area. Some vets were in the downwind area, prisoners who were brought in to harvest crops in the downwind area. I mean, it's quite a list of people. And the Native Americans got higher exposures than we got because they were outside a lot, and the things they ate, whole fish and herbs and things that uptook the radiation. So there are all these groups that were, the Native Americans had representatives on a separate panel from HHES because they were a government to government relationship. So those of us on the big panel didn't interact directly with them. They interacted with the ATSDR, but they were represented, and the Latino communities were represented, but all these other groups that the scoping surveys described were not. And I mentioned that in the book too, because I thought that was quite amazing.
Thank you. Other questions? Kathleen?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is there any central place that is tracking all these health related issues?
Boy, that's a great question too. You guys are asking really good questions. Here's the thing. There is supposed to be something called an exposure subregistry that the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry said we should have. That would attract all of us and looked at the other diseases we have. But because the Department of Energy is in charge of public health programs under Superfund law, if the ATSDR recommends a program, they can say, sorry, we need the money for cleanup. You can, so they denied our medical monitoring program, and they denied the sub-registry. That would have been something that would have tracked our diseases. There are a couple of health surveys done by community groups, but they weren't real big surveys, and they weren't necessarily medically verified diseases. Whereas in this book, I wanted to be really credible in this book, because a lot of times downwinders are sort of dismissed as not knowing what they're talking about, or they say, forget it. Those people couldn't have those. Every person in this book was a plaintiff, and every plaintiff had their diseases medically verified for the litigation. So it's very credible. I figured that'd be a really good way of just, making sure nobody could doubt that we had these diseases. But boy, I wish there was a huge survey, but who would fund it? I would love that to happen. It's a good question. That really is.
Right.
Other questions before we close?
Oh, it's been really nice being with you guys tonight. I got to tell you, I have this little Himalayan cat who, you say, why am I talking about this? I have a little Himalayan cat who started to decline a week ago, and she's 14 years old. And we took her in for an MRI today to find out if she had a brain tumor, and she died of cardiac arrest during the MRI. And it's been so depressing to me today. I thought, how can I possibly do this presentation? But you guys, I wanted to share the stories with you, and you guys are so wonderful that you brought up my spirit. So I want to thank you for that. It's hard to lose somebody who, even when it's a tiny cat, they're like your family, right? Anyway, it's terrible when it happens like that. You don't expect it's going to happen,
No, I am so sorry. We just lost our dog, same type of story. And I can feel for you totally, but all of us feel the same way. But there's also people that were downwinders that have a tough road to hoe, and it's not their fault at all. And they didn't even know it was going on.
It wasn't their fault. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So any last questions?
Holly.
Okay, so reminder,
Wait, Holly,
around August.
Holly has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Holly, you're muted.
Trisha, that was wonderful. Thank you. I've sent you a private little chat. I'd love you to connect with me. I am thinking that maybe Melinda Gates might be a funder for these things, because, Bill appears to be enamored with Elon Musk of the nuclear neighborhood nuke plant. Oh, what fun we could have with our neighborhood nuclear plants. But, maybe Melinda, now that she's going to get a few billion, could be a funder and bring all of this information together. Because I wrote that song back in the mid-'80s. I don't think it was even 86. We had this huge conference in Spokane.
Right.
It was called Hanford and Human Health. And it brought in Dr. Carl Grossman, with whom I still work in the Global Network Against Nuclear Weapons and Power in Space. And Wallace, and all these scientists who said, look at what they're doing at Hanford to bury nuclear waste. And it was like cardboard boxes in trenches.
I know.
It was crazy. So anyway, Trisha, thank you. This was very well said. beautifully presented, and thank you.
It's nice to meet you. Your song is beautiful. You're very talented.
I'll share it with you if you get in touch with me via my private email on the chat line.
I have to figure out how to do this. So here it is.
Oh, you can find it, I think, I hope so. Ask Julia or Tracy.
Oh, I will do
Or
that.
Bud.
Not all that technically, whatever, savvy here. So thank you.
Yeah, Holly, we certainly agree with those comments, and Kathleen's got a fun little surprise for the group, and then we'll close.
Okay, so we have two of her books here that we're giving away. So what we decided to do is think about your birth date, and then there are two dates that are important in regards to nuclear weapons, and so whoever has a birth date closest to these two dates will get a book. So the first date is August 6th, and that's the date of the Hiroshima bombing. And the second date is January 22nd, and that's the date that the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was ratified by the 50 countries that were needed to enter it into force. So if you have a birthday close to August 6th or January 22nd, raise your hand.
Ooh,
Oh,
exciting.
Holly? when's your-
Mine is February 18th. I don't know
Oh,
if
I
that's
might
close
do
enough.
it. Okay,
Ooh,
Yay!
that's great. I love
who
it.
else?
Oh,
Who's close to August?
Tracy had his hand up.
Yay!
I was born July 27th, 1945,
Oh, there you go. Tracy.
Oh, boy.
Okay,
100 miles from Trinity.
Wow, okay.
Yikes.
okay. Well, Tracy, you can have one, and then Holly, let me give you my phone number, and you can call me, and we'll figure out how to get it to you.
Okay, are you gonna do that now, or shall I get it from
Yeah, I'll do it
Julia?
right now.
Oh, okay, Kathleen, just say,
Again?
I'm ready.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
correct.
Thank you, Kathleen, thank you.
So I'm gonna ask Trisha just to stay on for a little bit longer. The meeting is officially over. Thank you for your attendance. Anyone that just thought of another question, please stay on. We'll visit just a little bit, but it's great seeing everybody. Bless you all, and thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bud, thank you.
Peace, everyone.
I
Wow.
just
boy.
wanted to mention too that it's interesting that Hanford, you can actually tour, not right now because of COVID, you can actually tour the B reactor that created the plutonium for these bombs. And
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat about that, as
Do you
well
mind
as Trisha's YouTube channel with lots of interesting videos.
Thank you. May I mention something on the Manhattan Project Historic National Park real quickly? I think you'd be interested in. Thanks. Okay, we have a group called CORE. It's Consequences of Radiation Exposure. It's existed since 2015, and I head this group. It's a nonprofit in Washington State. We were asked by the National Park Service to tell them what we thought should be in the museum as far as discussion of downwinders and health effects, et cetera, and in the other two sites, Los Alamos and Oak Ridge. So we've been working with them. We've had 2 meetings so far, 2 online meetings, and we presented them with a document saying that we want the stories of hibakusha and downwinders and workers who are sick included in the docents' talks and in the exhibits inside the museum. And we'd also like an oral history station there. And we have quite a few hibakusha working with us, which is great because they really want their stories told. But the Department of Energy is going to resist this very strongly. So if you have any suggestions on how the National Park Service can work to overcome the reticence of the Department of Energy on these things, let us know. So there's definitely a museum there, but it's very one-sided. It's all about the science and nothing about the downwinders, the workers, kids that are sick, nothing. I just wanted you to be aware of that whole thing going on behind the scenes there.
Good luck.
Yeah, right.
Well, what
Yep.
specifically could a group like ours do to assist that effort?
Ah, aha, excellent question. Well, there is a meeting I don't know if it was tonight, the same time as this. There was supposed to be a Seattle meeting, a Portland meeting. These are public meetings where people get on with the National Park Service and tell them what they think should be in the three sites. If you go to the National Park Service's website under, I think it's called stakeholder, I hate that term, stakeholder activities or something like that, it's got a list of those webinars. And perhaps you could join the next one, even though it might be Portland or whatever. When we did the first one, it was a public meeting for Hanford. There were all these guys who were denying there were any health problems, just sitting there saying, what are you guys talking about? There are no health problems. And there's a few of us who, well, I'm used to it because I've been on Hanford Health Effects Subcommittee for 9 years and I'm used to being dismissed, ignored and stuff. But the rest of them, this was their first experience with this kind of negativity, right? So that you might see at these public meetings. But if you were to sign up for either of the upcoming ones, it would be wonderful. And if you can't find that on the website, please email me at, can we put my email address somewhere so I could let you know where it is? I'll say what it is. It's TRI, like Trisha, ESQ, like Esquire. So TRIESQ@AOL.com. And I'll help you find where you sign up for those things. But don't be surprised when you have all these people on there saying there was no health effects from Hanford.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised. They just pack them in there.
I
So
wonder-
anyway, that's what's going on.
somebody-
Great.
I wonder if there's somebody we could write to, because a number of us have been on that Hanford tour, and you're right, there's nothing there.
I do have somebody you can write to.
And who would that be?
Yes. Yeah, her name is on the website. It's Chris Kirby, KRIS Kirby, and she's the NPS head for the Manhattan Project, the Spirit National Park. And also email me if you can't find her name and I'll send you her email address. Oh, if you started blasting her with letters, it'd be great. It'd be like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Thank you for asking about that.
See, is there a way we could get that in the chat and Zane, you could pick it up in the minutes?
You mean the Park Service?
And Chris's?
Oh, yeah. I think I can look it up on this phone here. Let me see. I think it's Chris.Kirby. So KRIS.KIRBY at MPS dot whatever. Org. Let me see. KRIS Kirby. It is, what is it? Okay, Chris, and then it's an underline, like Kirby, not Chris.Kirby, but Chris underline Kirby at nps.gov. Chris M. Kirby. But you can find all that stuff on the website. Yeah.
Trisha, if there's anything that we can do after tonight, feel free to email any one of us and we'll spread it around.
Well, thank you. You have like a group of the emails, everybody's emails that you can send me, like a little 8 or 10.
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me know if you attend that meeting. I'd love to see what your reaction is, these online meetings. I think Chuck would be really powerful in that situation too.
Yeah.
Chuck, anybody from Richland is like, anybody who'll speak out from Richland is very rare. We are a rare breed. Okay.
Trisha, I'd like to mention one more thing. We found out about you through our contacts with Lily Adams.
She's wonderful. I love her.
Yeah, she set up the coalition with WPSR and got us involved as a member organization. And she kind of mentored us as we were getting started as a group.
Oh, how wonderful is that? Did you read the review of this book that she wrote?
Yes.
Ha! Boy,
Yeah.
is she a good writer.
Yes. Yeah, her Nuclear Voices website got us to you.
Oh,
Just wanted to
I'm
shout
so
out to
thankful for her.
know,
Ever since I met her, my life has been easier because she facilitates things for me.
yes, she's
You know, and
awesome.
she's just so kind also, you know. That's wonderful to hear. I love hearing.
Kathleen, did you have another question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I'm just wondering where that Karen Steele, the journalist, where did she come from? It sounds
Oh,
like,
Spokane.
oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah, Chuck.
How do we get rid of Richland High School's mascot?
Yeah, right. Nobody gets Richland High School's mascot.
It's the atomic mushroom.
There's a lot on Sandstorm listserv about that. You better believe.
I know, Sandstorm, but how do we get rid of it?
Well, there's a lot about
That
that.
is something that would be able to create some national news.
You know what? It's so exhausting dealing with that. I figure I want to deal with trying to help all the people who are sick and haven't been helped first. And then if I have any energy left and I'm still alive, then maybe I'll work on the mascot thing.
I understand. I understand.
They're entrenched. They really are entrenched with that thing. Yep. Oh, you know, Holly, I was thinking one person you might like to meet is the person who found the person I mentioned earlier, who's a cinematographer from UC Santa Cruz. She's working on a
Okay.
film on Hanford in Richland, and she's the one that found that photo for me when she was in Richland. She went back. She's going back there next week again to work on her film, and she's a professor at UC Santa Cruz named Irene Lustig. But anyway,
Okay.
boy, I could see how her film and the music from Holly would be something.
Right.
I can send it to you later if you're muted.
I'd love that. What's your last name again? Lustig?
Lustig, I think.
Lustig. That sounds like Lustig. I've known a Lustig in England, actually. All right. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on that. I'll be sending you Downwind on email.
Thank you so much for that.
So you'll have it. It's quite wonderful. And
It is
thank you. I will follow up with that. I'd love to have anybody use whatever I can give them in the way of supporting the issues we
I know. I think art and music are a really good way to get through to people. That plus personal stories. The people pay attention to that stuff. Whereas you talk about the science and they kind of fall asleep, you know? So, yeah. It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for cheering me up too. Just from a point of view of having a terrible day today, made my day better. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's good. This is a nice group of people to hang out with.
I think so.
They're all lovely, lovely people.
Do you ever play bridge together or anything? Poker? No?
Ask Tracy and
Gotta do that.
That's funny. I don't know.
Well, you live in a beautiful place. I love it up there. We have one of our board members lives in Anacortes. Yeah.
Where are you located?
Huh?
Where are you?
Oh, Berkeley, California.
Oh, my daughter's in Oakland. Naples.
Yes, I've been locked in this house forever. You know, but people like me who have autoimmune problems, they're still trying to figure out whether the vaccinations, which I have had both of, actually create the same kind of protection as they do for people that don't have immune system problem. They're still trying to figure this out.
Wow.
So a lot of us who are downwinders are still stuck inside, even though the rest of the people are starting to go outside, right?
Yeah. Bummer.
Yeah.
What a bummer.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's been a joy to talk to you all. Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thank you.
Julia, for contacting me way back when.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been great.
Thanks everyone from you too. Bye.
So let's sign off by giving her a big send off.
Thank you, guys. You too. Take care. Thank you.
thank you.
Good night.